How's it going, guys? It's Adam here. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about the OnePlus 7 Pro and how it holds up in the middle of 2024. So let's get started. Probably the best place to start with this phone is definitely the design. We got a beautiful glass back design with the OnePlus logo and also the word OnePlus down here. And then a triple camera setup. We got a 48 megapixel main camera, we got a 16 megapixel ultra wide, and we got an 8 megapixel telephoto, as well as an LED flash. We've got our ringer here, which is actually really rare for an Android phone, and even the new iPhone Pros do not have this ringer. So it's kind of impressive that this does still have a ringer. There is also a power button on the side, and then on the other side we just got our volume rocker, and that's basically it for the sides. Now on the bottom we got a USB-C port as well as one of our speakers. This is the bottom firing speaker, but then another thing is that we got another speaker, an ear speaker, at the top. Now you also may notice is that when you open up the screen, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but we have a pop-up camera at the top. Besides that, this is a very beautiful design, very clean. Sometimes you can get fingerprints on the front and also the back. And by the way, this is aluminum on the sides. Now, let's look at the screen here. So first of all, this is on full brightness. And before I talk about that, actually, let's talk about the resolution of this display. It's a QHD display. It's 1440p, which is absolutely beautiful. I'm gonna zoom in here, and as you can see, there's no pixels visible. Even zooming in really far, 3 times right here, I do not see a single pixel, which is really great, honestly. It's really, really great. That's the one thing that I really love about this display. Another thing I really like about this display is actually the curved panel. Curved panel, a lot of people don't like, but personally, I love it. I think it makes the experience of using this phone actually a lot better, just because it just looks a lot better. It looks a lot more clean. It's just basically rolling off the edges, and I love that. Now, I will say one issue with this display, and I was saying this in the beginning, is the brightness. Now, the brightness is good, but it's not as good as something like the newest iPhones, or even the newest Samsung phones, or even the newest OnePlus phones. This was a phone from 2019, so this is about 5 years old, which is actually so crazy that this is 5 years old. I can't believe that. But anyways, in full brightness, this is what it looks like indoors. Now, if we're gonna go outdoors, you can see, can't really see too much of it. Now, I could actually see a little bit of it, but to you guys, I don't think you could see too much. I mean, actually, it's kind of getting a little bit brighter, but even then, it is still kind of hard to view in full brightness. But even if you're outside and even you're a little bit in the shade, then actually it is totally viewable. But that was one gripe that I do have about this display. But that's basically it. Let's move on from the display to more of the performance. So the performance, we have a Snapdragon 855, and my model has 8 gigabytes of RAM. So this can go up to 12, or it can go down to 6. But what I've noticed on most models that'll be selling for used, or which is what you're generally going to be finding on something like eBay or on Mercari or something like that, is, yeah, it's going to be 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, which is actually really great. You'll never fill up your storage, even if you download a bunch of apps. I mean, a ridiculous amount of apps. And so honestly, you won't have a problem with that. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people will have a problem with the performance. Even for day-to-day use, like just for doing simple tasks like web browser, or just scrolling on Twitter or watching YouTube, is absolutely fantastic. It takes full advantage of the display as well as the 90 hertz, which actually I completely forgot to mention. So I do apologize for that. But yeah, the 90 hertz display, and with this 1440p display, you'd think it would maybe hinder its performance a little bit, but honestly, it's fluid, it's smooth, it always constantly runs on 90 hertz, and you can't tell in this video because it's not a 90 FPS video. Most people will be probably watching this in either 30 or 60 FPS, so generally you won't notice this, but it is a very fluid display. And when you're going around the UI or anything like that, it is basically perfect. There's no stutters. Honestly, there's no crashes. This version of Oxygen OS is really stable. Now, I haven't gone to the latest Oxygen OS, so I am still, I believe, on Android 11. I can check what is the latest software update. So I'm pretty sure this is Android 12, which I know isn't the exact latest version, but honestly it's not bad still. More talking about that performance, that Snapdragon 855. So I said for day-to-day usage it's basically perfect, and for gaming it's also perfect. Running anything like Call of Duty Mobile or running other FPS games or any high-intensity games, maybe besides a few things like Genshin Impact or something like that, it's generally amazing. What I will say is that this is not flagship performance. You won't get 60 FPS or 90 FPS on every single game. Like I said, Genshin Impact and stuff like that will probably not get 60 FPS. What I'm saying is that this is a fantastic mid to upper range phone. This is not a flagship phone anymore. This was a flagship phone, or actually, even when this released, it was more of a flagship killer. And what I'll say is that no longer is this really a flagship killer just because it is a lot older now. And that happens to any kind of flagship killer. This is aging really well. It's just that this is more of a mid-range killer. It can totally, I would say, outperform most mid-ranges in terms of its performance, in terms of its display.
Quick side note, I do know that some phones like the Poco phones and also some other Xiaomi phones and some other, there are some mid-range phones that definitely outperform the OnePlus 7 Pro. What I am saying though is basically that the OnePlus 7 Pro is a mid-range killer because of its mid-range features. Like, it does have a lot of mid-range sort of specs and stuff like that, but it's actually cheaper than most mid-ranges, even though it's slightly maybe worse performance or maybe slightly worse of a display. Though I will say there aren't many phones with a curved 90Hz 1440p display that are mid-range, that is for sure, especially about that 1440p part, because most mid-range phones are 1080p. So just a quick side note, I am aware of cheaper, or not cheaper, but I am aware of basically phones that may outperform the OnePlus 7 Pro, but what I will say is that the OnePlus 7 Pro is a lot cheaper, and so in that way it is like a mid-range killer because it is having those specs of a mid-range, similar specs of mid-range, but way cheaper.
Before I get on to some other big topics, let me talk about some smaller things. So this is, I believe, 30 watt charging, up to 30 watt charging, and it generally charges in about 50 minutes to an hour, what I've noticed. This also does have a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, which is generally all right. It's not amazing, but it's not something that you're really going to be worrying about. It's not something like an iPhone SE where it's going to die after like 2 or 3 hours. This generally does have about 5 hours of screen on time, and it's really not that bad. And if you are worried about like battery life, and maybe you get more of a used model or something like that, it's still not much of a worry just because of how fast the charging is. So let's just say your phone does get low in battery, it'll charge up to about 50% in about 20 to 30 minutes, and that, in my opinion, is perfect. Let's now do something like a speaker test. So this is on full speakers. So as you can see, this is a stereo speaker setup, and honestly, it's pretty good. Let me get on to the main part. It's really, honestly, pretty great. Yeah, no complaints. What I will say about the speaker is that it's not going to be as good or as loud as something like an iPhone, but overall it is a really solid performing stereo speaker setup, especially for the price that it is, which I will mention at the end of the video. Alright, now to the part a lot of you probably have been waiting for, because this is a 5-year-old camera, and you might be like, okay, 48 megapixel camera setup sounds good, but is it really good because it is a 5-year-old camera? So before I go into these cameras, let me talk about what these cameras are. So like I said in the beginning, it's a 48 megapixel main camera, a 16 megapixel ultra wide that is about 120 degree field of view, and an 8 megapixel telephoto camera that is a 3 times zoom, which I did not mention in the beginning. So now that we have that out of the way, how is this camera? So let me first talk about the ultra wide camera. The ultra wide camera is 16 megapixels, like I said, and when you take photos, let me just take a photo right here, and I'll show you more photo examples later. Actually, this is in front of a screen door, so let me go over to here, and this is a little bit better because it's not like, won't be as bad. This will be a more real-life example. Okay, here we go. So when we're looking into this camera, I will say is that for the ultra-wide, this is pretty great in terms of the colors, in terms of the vibrance. I think it's great. Even in terms of the detail, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit here, and you can see it's, for an ultra-wide camera, especially compared to other mid-range phones, it's pretty great. And even I'm kind of saying, to some mid-range phones, to some flagship phones, they haven't even really upgraded their ultra-wide camera for some flagship phones. And I will say it's basically like the same quality as this, which is a 5-year-old camera, and honestly, sometimes it performs better. So to be honest, it's pretty great for the price. It's not going to be as good as an iPhone. What I will say, my main gripes about this is that it does darken the shadows a little bit too much for my liking. And I will say sometimes it has an over amount of contrast, but honestly, it sometimes works in its benefit for that. It does look pretty sharp and very vibrant, which kind of depends on your preference. So that is something to note right there. Let's go to the main camera, which is 48 megapixels. And honestly, my opinion, it looks great. Even in 2024, let's take a photo right here. See here. So there is a great amount of detail for a main camera, honestly. Not as good as something like an iPhone, but gotta be honest, it looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit over sharpened, but honestly, not really like Samsung over sharpened. I feel like Samsung a lot of the time over sharpens. This isn't too over sharpened. This is good. This is very vibrant, looks really good. It has pretty accurate colors. It does darken the shadows again, a little bit too much for my liking, because let me show you on this iPhone what this looks like. You can see on here, it is pretty over darkened. You can't even see the grass, but that's like my only gripe. Everything else is essentially perfect. Go into this 8 megapixel telephoto, and honestly, this might be one of the most impressive telephoto cameras from any kind of mid-range or anything like that. Honestly, it looks really great. Even for 8 megapixels, you might think 8 megapixels isn't that good or anything like that, but honestly, it has autofocus, which is a really big plus, because with a telephoto, you really want to have that kind of bokeh sort of feel for portrait shots or just any kind of shots, and it totally has that. And I'll say it has maybe even more, it has more like, I'm not saying it has more detail than the ultra wide, but because that is 16 megapixels, but sometimes it does have that appearance. Maybe it's a little bit more over sharpening. I don't know what it is, but let's even go to something like 5 times right here. Let's go to 4.7. Here we go. Go to 4.7 right here, and let's see how this looks. So this is with a little bit of digital, but honestly, it looks fantastic for 5 times zoom. I would even say it looks pretty lossless, and that is with a little bit of an asterisk, because it definitely isn't lossless. You are losing some detail, but from my view, honestly, it looks pretty great. Overall, these cameras are pretty awesome. So finally, let's talk about, is this worth it in 2024, 5+ years later? Even let's just go to 2025, 2026, any of these future years. I'll say in the next 1 to 2 years, and right now, I think this is an absolute steal, and I'll tell you why. This, for the price, which is about $130, when you're comparing that, you're really looking at really budget phones. But this almost feels like either an old flagship killer or a really good mid-range. And for $130, and sometimes even lower. And I actually have a few cracks on here. I got this about a year ago, and it was about 80, 90 bucks. So if you don't like mind like having a little bit of damage on your phone, and it's really not noticeable, like you can tell, for under 100 bucks, this is an absolute steal. In this price range, you're looking at phones like the Galaxy A0 series, which honestly is absolutely horrendous sometimes, is really unusable. I personally used the Galaxy A01 a couple of years back, and it was essentially unusable on Android 10. So to be honest, it's kind of horrible for the A01, but any A series in terms of the A0 series. And even for something like a Galaxy A30 series, A40 series, A50 series, anything like that, I would say this is a better deal. I know that the A30 series and I believe the 50 series do have 120 hertz displays, but this has a flagship Snapdragon 855, which is older, but generally performs better than the newer, cheaper Snapdragons. So honestly, this is definitely worth it. Now going over like thinking about like, let's just say you were looking for alternatives. I will say the Poco series by Pocophone is really a good alternative to this, because it's almost like a flagship killer, and I believe sometimes it goes on sale for sometimes $199 or even cheaper than that. So that could be an option if you're into that. What I will say is that it's not completely available for the US all the time. My model is a T-Mobile model for T-Mobile only. Actually, I got it T-Mobile unlocked. There is T-Mobile only options is what I'm trying to say. And so if you're like wanting something that works completely with your carrier, something that will be able to work completely, have all the bands that supports the United States, because I know that is a problem. I have had people that have complained about that, even family members. One of my family members actually had a Realme 6 a couple of years back, and they were pretty disappointed with the amount of lack of bands basically that is supported for the United States. I think there's basically the main bands for this, and I'm kind of going on a little bit, but the main bands for these I believe is band 5. That's the main one, and I believe, I could be wrong, but some Chinese and European models of phones do not have that. So that's why I'm saying like the Pocophone generally isn't available in the US. And so if you are looking for alternatives and you see something like a Pocophone, or like maybe a Xiaomi phone or a Realme or something that is a Chinese or maybe European brand, I will say beware, and make sure to look on Nano Review. I don't know the exact website name off the top of my head, but just search up Nano Review on Google and you'll totally see, just search up your phone and it'll generally, I believe, show the bands. And also besides that, I think there's another one called Kimoval, and that will also show the amount of bands, I'm pretty sure. But definitely do your own research if you are looking for those kind of phones. But what I will say for this phone is that it is definitely a steal, and I highly recommend it in 2024 and going on for the next 1 to 2 years, because I'm not sure how many more software updates this will get. But anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I would like to apologize for the lack of uploads. I did have a schedule for every single week, going all the way into May of 2024, and now it's July of 2024, and so the thing is, I didn't have any more videos scheduled, and I have been in college, so yeah, basically that's why I haven't been uploading, but I am continuing to upload. Oh, sorry, it's June. What am I thinking? But yeah, anyways, new videos every single week, maybe even more than one a week. And yeah, that's basically it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.